Okay, sponsors. The whole series has been sponsored by two sponsors. Number one, an anonymous sponsor in memory of Yisrael ben Aryeh Leib Zal climbing around sites in Eretz Yisrael. And sponsors number two, Naomi and Mark Chernin. In honor of the IDF, may Hashem continue to give Am Yisrael strength and may we be blessed with peace. And that is always a good intro to the hope that our learning should be in the merit of our soldiers and their success and their protection and the immediate return of our hostages and the refuah shlema of all of the wounded and anyone who needs a refuat hanefesh, refuat haguf. Okay, so let's get started. So basically, last time we really went in the direction, deep dive into Byzantine period with the Medva map and really talking a lot about the Christian world. I want to bring us back today to our roots, right? And to Jews in a time period where you have a lot of powerful non-Jews who are fighting over Eretz Yisrael, right? We're in the time period we're going to be talking about Muslims and then Crusaders and then Muslims again. You have a lot of back and forth where Eretz Israel really again becomes the center of the world's attention. That's why I brought you this map, even though this map is from the 16th century and we're going to be somewhat earlier. But it's the Bunting map, which of course puts Yerushalayim in the center here. And the world's attention has turned to Eretz Israel with the Crusades and then the aftermath of the Crusades. And I wanted to bring us our two objects today are examples of powerful Jewish life, even when we don't have military power, political power, but intellectual Jewish life and thought. So that's just our very general introduction. We'll get to our objects very soon. I'll put the sources in the chat one more time for people who didn't join till later. Okay. So our general timeline, we're kind of a long time period here. Our first object is going to be taking place in, I feel like it's a game show, right? Our first object is the time period of the early Muslim conquest, right? Islam begins in the early 7th century and very, very, very quickly kind of sweeps out of Arabia and conquers much of the known world. By 638, conquest of Yerushalayim. Right? Jews allowed back into Yerushalayim. It's a very, very big game changer, as we saw in the last two classes. Roman times, Byzantine times, no Jews are allowed into Jerusalem. And then we have this very interesting flourishing, a few different things. Okay, we're going to talk about the Karaites, but we're also going to talk about the Masoretes and the very important community, Jewish community in Tveria. Okay, around 900. Here's our spoiler: is our first object, and that's the Aleppo Codex. Okay, so around 900, and then what happens to it and where it goes. 1099. Crusaders come and conquer Jerusalem. Even if Jewish life under the early Muslims was not idyllic, it was very much better than under the Crusaders, who essentially just massacred the Jews and Muslims of Jerusalem. But soon enough, you have the not so soon, but within 2 centuries, less than 2 centuries, you have the Mamluks come and essentially kick out the Crusaders. And our second object is going to be connected to Ramban, to Nachmanides, who's living in this very, very volatile time when we have the Crusaders coming and then they are losing control, and the Mamluks come and conquer. And the Ramban is in Jerusalem and is in Akko, kind of at the tail end of the Crusader period. Muslims are already controlling again in Jerusalem, but he comes to Akko, which is still under Crusader control. Okay, the tail end of our story here is after 1948. Are two objects, right? The Aleppo Codex, at least parts of it, are brought to Jerusalem. And in 1972, our second object, the Ramban seal, is discovered. Okay, so that's just to give us kind of a larger picture of what we're talking about. Okay, object number one, Come on down. Object number one is a very famous one. That's called the Aleppo Codex, also called the Keter Aram Tzova. We're going to talk about Aram Tzova, Aleppo, Chaleb. They're all the same thing. This is one of the really beautiful pages of the Codex. So a few things that are important. We already said the date, about 900. Okay, we're going to talk about who writes it, but we're talking about Tveria. It's written in Tveria, and then it has a complicated journey to lots of different places. But if you look at it carefully, you'll notice a few things that make it different from other texts that we have before this. First of all, it's a codex, i.e., it's a bound book. Right, you can see that, and you can flip the pages, compare that to a Megillah, right, to a Sefer Torah, Megillat Rut, right? This is a different style of writing. It's not one long scroll that you have to unroll and be able to find your place, right? We've all seen Torah scrolls being rolled to find one place or another. Here it's a book. We all know how books work, right? You can flip back and forth. It's much easier for reference purposes. You can go back and forth. Number two, it is all of the books of Tanakh bound together, right? We are so used to that today. We have our Tanakhim, but this is not a standard thing that you had in ancient times. You had scrolls. You had a scroll of Megillot. You had a scroll of Breshit. You had a scroll of all of the Torah. You had a scroll of Yeshayahu. But to have everything together, that again, easy reference point. But what's really the game changer here is if you look carefully, and we'll see close up of other texts a little later, you can see that unlike a Sefer Torah, right? And I hope most people here have seen a Sefer Torah up close. If not, go find yourself your local Sefer Torah. Unlike a Sefer Torah, this has nikud, right? It has the vowelization. It has the ta'amim. Okay, it has the notes, right? That we use the trup to sing, and it has notes in the margins that will tell you various things about the text. Okay, and that's what we're going to talk about, the nikud, the ta'amim, the Masoretic notes. This is something that is very old, but was not written down or was only beginning to be written down when this text is written. Okay, this text is written by a scribe named Shlomo ben Boya. Okay, and then it was the notes, the vocalization, the nikud, the ta'amim, all of that was added by someone named Aaron ben Asher. We know this because we have what's called a colophon, kind of an addendum to the book that tells us this information. So very, very important information. So what do we know about the Aleppo Codex, and what can it tell us about its time period? So something that is very important to understand, okay, is that we have people called the Masoretes. Okay, Masoretes, here we have a Torah scroll, so you can zoom in if you want, and you can see that while it has the decorations, the ktarim, right, the letters are very beautiful and made in the scribal way, it does not have nikud, it does not have ta'amim, it does not have notes. Um, the Masoretes are people who live in Tveria in the 8th, 9th century of the Common Era, and they take it upon themselves to write down what we're going to see in a minute is a very powerful oral tradition of how the words are pronounced, how the tune goes, what are parashot ptuchot, what are parashot stumot, right? Where do the parshiot start and end? Chapters, by the way, is a much later development, and it's a Christian development. It's not a Jewish development, right? Chapters come about from Christian Bibles and often in a rather anti-Jewish way. But where the parsha starts, where it ends, right? Psukim, that is known for a long time, but they write it down. This is not only done in Tveria, but the teachers of Tveria are known for their being very, very careful with grammar, okay, with diction. They travel around, they teach this, and they are also very involved in writing what we call piyutim, right? Religious poetry, not only in Tveria, but many of them are in Tveria. And if you've ever read like a really intense piyut, there's a lot of wordplay. There's a lot of like messing around with the meanings of the words and the roots of the words. You really have to know your language very, very well. And language is a very big deal deal for them. The most famous family of Masoretes are the Ben Asher family, who we're going to see. Aaron Ben Asher, we saw, is the guy who is in charge of the vocalization of the Aleppo Codex. Okay, we didn't get to the Aleppo part. Don't worry. Okay, this is a great on the right here, right? You have our Torah on the left, but on the right, you have this great sculpture in Tveria. Tveria, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, decided that they wanted to make on the promenade that goes down to the Kinneret, there are all these nice sculptures. Some of them are about the sea. They're all different kinds of things. Some are fish. This is Nikud. Right? This is the vowels, and I love it because here are these guys just carrying their vowels from place to place. Right? And that's because Nikud, the Nikud that we use today, right? That every first grader who learns how to read Hebrew has to learn the Tzereh and the Kamatz and the Patach, et cetera, comes from Tveria. So they put this in the on the main boardwalk in Tveria. Okay, but the Masoretes are not the ones who invent the Masorah. The Masoretes are the ones who write it down and standardize it. Okay. But it's something that exists from much earlier. So if you look, we have all kinds of different things in various Gemaras that talk about this. People knew this tradition, but it wasn't written down like a lot of things, right? We have Torah Shabbal Peh. So we have this famous, well-known Gemara in Nidarim. I will read it in Hebrew first because it's important to understand the terms that are used. To Amar Rav Ika bar Abin, Amar Rav Chananel, Amar Rav, Mai dichtiv, vayikru b'sefer Torah Elokim miforash b'shom seichel v'yavinu b'mikra, right? We have three things in the pasuk in Nehemiah. They read in the Torah of God, miforash, okay, translated here as distinctly, shom seichel, right? The sense, okay, v'yavinu b'mikra, and understanding the reading, okay? V'yikru b'sefer Torah Elokim ze mikra. That's the words. That's the text of the Torah. Miforash ze targum. That's the translation, the Aramaic translation, right? The Onkelos that we have. Som seichel, they gave the sense. Elu hapsukim, that's the division into verses. Vayavinu b'mikra, ze pisuk hatamim. That is the punctuation with the trup, with the ta'amim that we have today. Elu ha-misorot. Others say, no, these are the traditions, meaning what are the misorot? Misorot are how many times does this word appear? How many times is this a one-time thing? Is it more than once, right? All different kinds of traditions. Amar Rav Yitzchak, Mikra Sofrim, V'itur Sofrim, Kriyin velo ktivin, ktivin velo kriyin, halacha leMoshe miSinai. Okay, Rav Yitzchak says something very interesting. Okay, we have three different things. Mikra Sofrim is how you pronounce the words. Okay, this is the explanation of the Ran. Itur Sofrim is the ornamentation, right? Not like what we might think, the little crowns and all that stuff, but rather sometimes you have a word that seems out of place, that seems very fancy, right? Rashi often picks up on these things. Why would you choose that word and not another word? That's also halacha Moshe miSinai, something that we know already from Har Sinai. The last one is the easiest to explain. Kri v'lo chtiv, chtiv v'lo chri, right? If you read in the Torah or in the Navi, sometimes you have words that are not read, or there a different word is added in and put, and we don't say the original word, often because it's a word that's not so proper, that's a little embarrassing, right? That's called kriyutiv. All of those things the Gemara says, not only does the Gemara know about it, but the Gemara says it goes back to Moshe. Right? These are very, very old ideas. Okay. Even nicer, not nicer, but another very nice thing, right? The Gemara in Kiddushin says the first sages were called sofrim, those who count, right? If you ever think about that, a sofer, like a sofer stam, you say, okay, it's a scribe, but it's not what it means. A sofer, lispor, is to count. They would count all the letters in the Torah. Today, okay, even before there was Google and before there was AI, but there were computer programs where you could say, okay, how many letters are in Sefer Breshit? What's the midpoint of Sefer Breshit? What is, how many times do we have Shem Hashem here? And how many times we have Elohim? Today with a computer, we can do that in a second. People made it their lives work. Okay. They spent lots and lots and lots of time figuring out, right? You can see this in Chumashim. This is the midpoint of Sefer Vayikra, right? This is how many letters in the letters. This is how many words, right? Why? Because these are important in the understanding of the text. And before computers, this was a much more complicated endeavor, but people did that. Now, I brought here two different texts just so that we can really understand this distinction. Okay, the top text, these are identical texts in terms of the words, right? This is Tehillim, Tehillim Kuf. I don't remember, maybe Kuf Lamed, right? Hine Matov Manaim. Okay, the top one is the Dead Sea Scroll. Okay, and here you have, and it's pretty easy to read, right? These are the letters that we use, our letters, except for one notable exception. We'll see in a minute. Shir Ma'alot LeDavid, Hine Matov Manaim, Shevet Achim Gam Yachad, Kashem Hatov Al Rosh, right? Etc. Etc. Very nice, easy to read the letters, except for one letter, one word here, which is this word. Okay. If you read along, what is this word? Kisham Tziva Hashem. Okay. Hashem in the Dead Sea Scrolls is often written in the Ketav Ivri, in the old Hebrew letters. These are our Hebrew letters that are the Ketav Ashuri that we have from Second Temple times. Sometimes in the Dead Sea Scrolls, they will write Shem Hashem in the old Hebrew letters. Why? Either because they feel that the old Hebrew letters are holier, right? Which is interesting, right? Write the Shem Hashem with the old Hebrew letters, or Tafka the opposite. We feel that the old Hebrew letters are chol. It's not the letters that we use anymore as Kodesh, and we don't want the text to be like Shemus, like so holy. So we write Shem Hashem in the old letters, right? There are both opinions on this. But really what I want you to notice here, of course, is that we have the same text, but on the bottom, and this is what you'll see in any good Tanakh today, you have the Nikud, you have the Tamim, you have all those things that are standard added into text that we have today. That comes from the Masoretes. They knew about it, but they didn't write it down. They are the guys who write it down. Okay. Now, interesting, we're going to see that the text, the Ben Asher family, may have been Karaites. We don't know. There are differences of opinion, but we know for sure that there are Karaites who buy the Codex, who buy it about 100 years after it's written, the Karaite community in Jerusalem, right? We have a dedication. It says, Skulat HaKaraim HaShochnim Bahar Tzion. Okay, there's a picture of the Karaite synagogue today in the old city of Jerusalem. Okay, these guys did not live in what we call the Rova today. They lived on Har Tzion, but there definitely is a Karaite connection here. Who are the Karaites and why would this Aleppo Codex be so appealing for them? Okay, so the Karaites are very important at this time, about 1,100 years ago. They are really at the height of their power, largely in Egypt, but not only. But the Karaites are created a few hundred years earlier. We have differences of opinion about what the Karaites are. The Rabbinite, i.e. us, opinion is that the Karaite sect is created by someone named Anan ben David, and he lived in the time of Yehudai Gaon. This is the text that we have up here. Anan and Shaul, his son, made the name of the wicked rot, right? Really doesn't like them. Avraham ben Ibn Daud lived in the days of Yehudai Gaon, right? Here he says 8th century. The Karaites say that they're earlier. This Anan was a descendant of the house of David and a scholar originally, but people discovered something wrong in him, and for this reason, he was not appointed Gaon, right? Here we are in Babylonia. You have people who are the heads of the yeshivot, Gaonim, they're called Gaon, and the fates decree that he should not become exarch either. You have the Reish Galuta, the head of the community. He doesn't become either of those things. Because of the envy and chagrin in his heart, he enticed the Jews away from the traditions of the sages. He composed books and raised disciples, and of his own accord devised statutes that are no good. So according to Abraham, even Dowd, Anan creates the sect out of spite. He's mad. He's passed over to become a Gaon. He's passed over to become an exarch. And so he says, I don't want any part of you, of the Amoraim, of the Geonim, of any of the rabbinate tradition. I'm going to make my own tradition. However, Karaite scholar, okay, many, many years later, but he's following the Karaite tradition, says something very different. Anan of blessed memory lived in Baghdad, belonged to the party of the Tzaddikim or the Tzdukim, right? Which there's a lot of similarities between the Tzdukim, the Karaites, the Shomronim. They are different people, but there are similarities because they're different time periods. Because of his great wisdom, the whole house of Israel chose him to be president of the court and the exilarch. Adnan desired to restore the crown of the law to its pristine glory and began to preach in public and to argue against the oral law of the Mishnah, to deny it and repudiate it completely. And Anan rose and took with him his sons and disciples. They went to Jerusalem and settled there and built a synagogue. Okay, so we have two different approaches. One, of course, is the rabbinate approach that Anan is a malcontent and he just throws away the Torah Shebaal Peh. The Karaite approach is no, we are the real, this is the real Jews. The oral law, the Torah Shebaal Peh is a perversion of what Hashem wants. And we are going to look in the Torah and we are going to understand the real law, right? Which doesn't mean there is not a Torah Shebaal Peh. It's just their Torah Shebaal Peh. Okay. But what's important for our purposes is another name of the Karaites is B'nai Mikra, the sons of the text. And so a proper text, a text that is standardized, a text that has all the notes and the corrections, that's super important to them because they don't have Mishnah, they don't have Gemara, they have the text and they want to be able to know what is that proper text. So are the Ben Asher's Karaites? Controversy. Did Karaites buy the Aleppo Codex at some point? Yes, for sure. Okay, so that we do know. Now, we said this codex is called the Aleppo Codex, the Keter Aram Tzova, right? Why don't we call it the Tveria Codex? Because the codex has a very complicated journey. Okay. It is written in Tveria, maybe commissioned by wealthy Karaites. We don't really know the story for its first 100 years, but like we said, 100 years later, about the year 1000, it is bought by the Karaite community on Har Zion, meaning in Yerushalayim, and it's brought to Yerushalayim and it's used there. And again, it's not meant to be laned from. This is not a Torah scroll. It's a reference work for you to check your Torah scrolls, for you to check your own texts. Okay. But in 1099, when Yerushalayim is captured by the Crusaders know that Jews are crazy and they will ransom not only people, right, but texts, and they take hostage not only people, right? Our situation today is not an anomaly, unfortunately, in Jewish history. They take captive not only people, but valuable texts. And they know that the Jews will put up the money to ransom this text. And indeed, the Jews of Egypt do ransom the text from the Crusaders, and it's brought to Fustat in Egypt, where, again, a little bit later, who uses this text very famously? The Rambam. Okay, and the Rambam actually writes in the Mishnah Torah, right, in the Hilchot Ktivat Sefer Torah, the copy. He says it's a mitzvah to write a Torah scroll, right, to have your own Torah scroll. He says I wrote my own Torah scroll. The copy on which I relied is the well-known Egyptian Codex. He doesn't even mention Tveria, which contains the 24 books of the scriptures, which have been in Jerusalem for several years, used as the standard text for the examination of scrolls. Everyone relied upon it because it had been examined by Ben Asher, who closely studied it for many years and examined it again whenever it was being copied. This codex was the text on which I relied in the scroll of the law that I wrote according to the rules. And once the Rambam says, oh, this is the text, everyone follows the Rambam, right? And uses what the Rambam writes in the Mishnah Torah in order to be able to write their own Torah scrolls. As we're going to see, this text has a huge impact on our text today. But before we get there, let's just talk for a minute about the fact that books are very scarce. Okay, I was considering next week, and I'm not sure yet what I'm going to do. We might talk a little about printing. Okay, printing is definitely one of those inventions that changes history. Okay, but we, of course, are in the pre-printing era, and there are not a lot of books out there. And you have to have a lot of money to have books. And a community might have a book that everybody shares or everybody has access to. You have to be very rich to have your own books in your own library. This is actually you have to be even richer to create a beautiful illuminated manuscript. Okay, this is a Bible from the 10th century called the Gaster Bible. It's got all these beautiful decorations here. And you got to take good care of your books. And anyone who loves books, chances are, if you're Jewish and you love books, you've come across this part of the ethical will of Yehuda ibn Tibon, the Ibn Tibon family from Provence. They're a famous family of translators. Yehuda ibn Tibon's son Shmuel ibn Tibon is a translator of the Rambam from Arabic to Hebrew. Okay, and Yehuda ibn Tibon writes to his sons, and he says, I've collected a large library for thy sake, so that thou needest never borrow a book of anyone. Right? He had the money, and he had the interest. As you yourself see, most students run hither and thither searching for books without being able to find them. And he says, be grateful that I got you these books. And then he tells them how to take care of it. Look over your Hebrew books every month, your Arabic books every 2 months, your bound books every 3 months. Keep your library in order so you will never need to search for a book. I know many of us, certainly me, could take this advice. Right? Prepare a list of the books on each shelf and place each book on its proper shelf. Take care of the loose separate leaves in your book because they contain exceedingly important things, which I myself have collected and written down, right? Very interesting, actually, right? As long we talk about how important books are and how holy and special, and you have to take good care of them. However, we know that in the pre-printing age, first of all, paper parchment is scarce, and also people have. I was just listening to a very interesting podcast this week, talking about the idea of the open book, right? Meaning we think of a book as a finished text, but people had books and they put their own notes in and they wrote their own stuff in, and they added in their messages and their thoughts and their perushim, and sometimes that ends up in the next copy of the book because nobody knows, is this Rashi or is this a student of Rashi, right? All kinds of interesting things. So he says, I wrote all sorts of things here. Lose no writing and no letter which I leave you. Cover your bookshelves with beautiful curtains. Protect them from water, from mice. Why, mice, very bad. And from all harm because they are your best treasure. Okay, so we can understand this codex is not one of copies and copies of Tanachim on the shelf in your local Feldheim, but it's very, very unusual. Okay, let's get to our Aleppo connection. Okay, so Aleppo is Chaleb, is Aram Tzova. Okay, I don't know if I have any Chalebim listening to this class. Chalabi Jews are what's used by them, Syrian Jews. Aleppo is Chalabi is probably one of the oldest names. We identify Aram Tzova of Tanakh with Aleppo, with Chaleb. It's all the same place. It's a very, very ancient city. This is a fortress that parts of it date back at least 2,000 years. The Jewish community of Chaleb identifies itself with Aram Tzova and particularly with David HaMelech and Yoav. And they say that the beginnings of the community and the foundation of the great synagogue, the central synagogue of Aleppo, was laid by Yoav ben Tzruya, the commander, David's military commander, his chief of staff, right? And we have here in Sefer Shmuel, Vayach David et Hadadezer ben Rehov Melech Tzova. Okay, so we have a lot of Arams, right? We have Aram Naharaim. We have all different kinds of Aram, and this is Aram Tzova. Later in Tehillim, okay, Tehillim 60, Tehillim Samech, right? We have the beginning. It says Bahatzoto et Aram Naharaim vet Aram Tzova. Vayashav Yoav. And here we have the Yoav connection. Vayachet Edom b'gei melech shnei masar elef. Okay, so Aram Tzova is very much connected with Yoav. And the tradition of the Jews of Aram Tzova, of Chaleb, is that the synagogue, the foundations were laid by Yoav. Archaeologically, can we prove this? Not so much, but that's definitely very much the tradition. Um, the one thing that's very interesting in halacha, we have Eretz Yisrael, we have Chutz La'aretz, but we have this in-between category, and that's Surya. Okay, Surya, which is this area, and it's in between. It's holier than the land of Israel, but it's not, I'm sorry, it's holier than Chutz La'aretz, but it's not quite as holy as Eretz Yisrael. And the Rambam explains this. And the lands which King David conquered outside of the land of Canaan, Aram Naharaim, Aram Sova, Chaleb, and the like, even though he was a king of Israel and he was acting with the consent of the high court, it is not considered as the land of Israel with regard to all matters, but nor is it like the diaspora. Babylonia, Egypt, right? Instead, it was removed from the category of the diaspora, but did not enter the category of Eretz Israel, right? The Rambam says that if David had done this with, he had taken it in a Milchemet Mitzvah, a Milchemet Rishud, it would be like Eretz Israel. But it's interesting that it has this in between halachic stance, halachic standards. So the community of Aram Sova is a very, very important, very holy community. Um, and they take the Keter and they put it to be safeguarded, okay, in a chest in the basement of the shul. So this is a picture of the central synagogue, the Beit Knesset Merkazi of Aram Tsova. I don't know how many people here saw the Israel Museum. I don't think it's on anymore, but for about a year, they had this fascinating, fascinating film. There was a woman photographer who went at great personal risk back to the Beit Knesset. This is in 1947, and she takes photographs, and then United Nations votes on partition. The Armenian photographer that she's with is basically blackmailing her that he's going to give her up to the authorities if she doesn't give him more money. And she grabs the photographs. She somehow manages to get hold of them, and she escapes. And she brings them. She's safe, and the photographs are safe, but it takes a very long time. And then recently there was a producer, a photographer, I think, who created from these photographs kind of a documentary showing you the inside of the Beit Knesset. It's fantastic. Okay. But basically, the community takes the Keter and they don't really use it for what its purpose is, which is, like we said, it's a reference work. And instead, they use it, it's sort of like a talisman. Okay? They put it in the basement, they lock it up in a chest. It's meant to protect the Beit Knesset. And sometimes, occasionally, a scholar will visit, they'll allow them to look at it. Okay? So, in the 19th century, you have somebody named Rav Shalom Shachna Yalin, or some people say it wasn't him, it was his son-in-law, son-in-law Rav Yeshua Kimchi, who comes and he is allowed to look at the text and he copies out into his own Tanakh, the Mesorah, for the Torah, for the Haftorah, for the Chamesh Megillot. By the way, fascinating, his Tanakh is lost for years. Okay. And later in 1987, a member of his family, a descendant, is looking through stuff in an attic and finds it. Okay. And it's studied by someone named Yossi Ofer, and it's fascinating. Okay. The gentleman here on the right is Moshe David Kasuto. Hey, Moshe David Kasuto, great Bible scholar. He comes in the 1940s, okay, and he also wants to get permission. They say no pictures, but you can sit and you can look. And of course, he looks and he takes notes and he looks at it very carefully. What happens here? Okay, the community safeguards it. They believe that it safeguards then. However, 2 days after the United Nations votes on partition, December 2nd, 1947, riots break out against the Jewish community in Aleppo. The synagogue is attacked, and the Keter is a very big mystery, right? What happens to it? Some of it disappears. People at first said, oh, there was a fire, it was destroyed. 10 years later, 1957, it shows up in Israel. I'm deliberately using that term. It's very mysterious how it got here, but only parts of it show up. Yitzchak ben Tzvi and Yad ben Tzvi takes charge of it. It's used as a basis for the Tanakh of Rav Breuer, but there are parts that disappear. And if you want to know more about the mystery, Mati Friedman wrote a great book called The Aleppo Codex. There's also a film that came out not so long ago about it, and it's a fascinating mystery. But really, I want to talk for a minute before we go on to our second object about the impact that this text had. Okay, this text had a huge impact. It essentially standardizes the nikud, the ta'amim, the Mesorah, the notes. Okay, 100 years later, You have another codex. Today it's called the Leningrad Codex because it's kept in Leningrad, but really it's from Cairo. And it follows this same system. And we actually know more about it. It's the only one that is complete. It's the oldest complete, not the only, it's the oldest complete Tanakh. It had an easier life, and you have this great, entry page. It shows you the name of the Sofrim. It shows you when it was written. But what's important is that they take this Tveria system, and between the Aleppo Codex, the Leningrad Codex, and the Rambam, this is what we use, right? So it has a huge impact on all of our Tanachim today, and it's very significant. I brought this. It's from the introduction to Leningrad Codex, just because it's fascinating, right? What it says: "Zal machzor mikra shalem nichtav v'nigmar b'nikudot u'misorot u'mugay yafeh b'medinat Mitzrayim." Right. So this is the machzor, right? It's the cycle of the year, but it's really the Tanakh, that it has all of the mikra, it has nikudot, it has traditions. It was checked over in Mitzrayim, and then it tells you the date, but it doesn't tell you one date. It tells you 5 dates. One is the date to creation of the world, right? The Hebrew date, Briat HaOlam. One is the date to Galut Yehoyachin, the Galut V'Acharash Ma'amazger. I'm not reading through all the numbers. You can read it. One is the date to what we call Minyan Shtarot, okay, the Greek system, which begins in 312 BCE. One is the date for Churban Bayit Sheni, and one is Malchut Keren Ze'ira, which is the Muslim date, the Hejra. Okay, now not all these dates are exactly the same, by the way. There's 1008, there's 1009, there's 1010. Which one is it, right? We don't know 100%, but I think it's fascinating that all of these dates, secular, religious, different religious, they put them all in. Okay, that was our first text. We have a lot to do in our first object. We have a lot to do in our second object. Let's see if we can get through it. This object is a lot less well known than the Keter. And you can see it. It's got a lot less writing, but it's also writing. And it has the name of somebody very, very important, who is the Ramban. We're going to read it exactly. Don't worry. We will get to it in another slide or two. Okay. But before we get there, this is a small seal, right? It's 22 meters 22 millimeters diameter, so really not very big. 17 millimeters high with a handle, has a handle. It's made out of copper. It was discovered in 1972 by a place called Tel Kisan. You'll see in a minute where that is. It is, like we said, it's made out of metal. How do you make such a thing? You make a model in wax. You put a hole, you cover it with clay, you put a hole in it, and then you melt the wax. You heat it up, the wax melts away. You have this clay model, you pour in metal, and then you break the clay, and you have this amazing metal seal. So where is this discovered? Okay, so this is Tel Kisan. You can see it also on the modern map. But what's nice about this map is it shows you that Tel Kisan is on one of the two main roads that go from Akko to the center of the country. So it's very likely that somebody would be walking along this road and something could fall out of his pocket. As we are going to see, the Ramban spends his last years in Akko. So he could theoretically, very likely, that he is walking along this road, going to perhaps some other Jewish communities. There are Jewish communities at this time in Haifa and other places, Tel Kisan as a Jewish community, and he's walking there and it falls out of his pocket, right? Lost objects are very sad for the owner of the object, but they're fascinating for archaeologists, right? Because this is going to teach us a whole world. So let's see, what does it say? Okay, so it says, I brought it here also so you can keep looking at it. So it's relatively easy to read, even if you're not so great at reading inscriptions, which is I am not. Okay, and it says Moshe is easy. Bet Reish ben Rabbi Nachman. Okay, Moshe ben Rabbi Nachman, Nachmanides. Okay, Nun Roshei Tevot. Nun Nach Nefesh or Noach Nefesh. Noach Nefesh, as we're going to see, is a nice way to say Zal Alav Shalom, deceased, right? Who's it talking about? It's talking about Rabbi Nachman, right? His father, right? Moshe ben Rabbi Nachman, whose soul should have rest. Okay. Rabbi Moshe is alive, his father is not. The next word, Girondi. Where is he from? Okay, very important. Where is he from? Girondi, Chazak. Okay, so let's look at certain elements of this seal. First of all, Moshe ben Nachman, that's fine. That's easy. We call him Nachmanides because he is the son of Nachman. What's this Nach Nefesh or Nuach Nefesh? Lots of different places in the Gemara, both in the Bavli and in the Yerushalmi. When it wants to talk about someone who died, we say Nach Nafshe. Okay, same idea. His nefesh should have a rest. So I brought you two examples here from the Bavli, but you also have examples in the Yerushalmi. Amar Rav Kahana Ishtayli Rav Chama Bar Barte Dechasa Rabba Bar Nachmani Agav Shmada Nach Nafshe. Rabba Bar Nachmani died due to the fear of a decree of religious persecution. Okay, even more famous Gemara at the end of Ketubot, when we hear about Rabbi Yehuda Nasi dying, Hahu Yoma Dinach Nafshe de Rabbi, Gazru Rabbanan Ta'anita, Ba'arachme, Va'amra, Kol Manda Amar Nach Nafshe de Rabbi, Yidaker B'cherev. We don't want anybody to say Rabbi died, so nobody's allowed to say it, but what's the word to say that he died? Nach Nafshe. Even more intriguing, okay, the Ramban himself writes, gives a eulogy for somebody important in Spain, whose name is Avram Bar Yitzchak, and he starts it by saying, Nuchot nafsha uminucha bimkom kedusha tehei leruach Rabbi Avraham Bar Yitzchak. So this is a phrase that the Rambam for sure uses. The way he signs his name, okay, he identifies himself as Girondi. Okay, we actually have a piyut that the Ramban wrote. It's called Mirosh Mikadmei Olamim. And like a lot of religious poetry, a lot of piyutim, the author puts his name in an acrostic, right? So the first paragraph will start with a mem, and the second paragraph will start with a shin, right? Etc., etc. This one says Moshe ben Rabbi Nachman Girondi. It actually says Yirondi. It doesn't have the gimel. It just has a yud. Yirondi, and then the last paragraph spells out Chazak. So we know this is how the Ramban signs his name, and there are too many coincidences to make this some other Moshe, the son of Nachman. This is the Ramban. This is our Ramban. Girona, right, is in northeastern Spain. It's in a place called Catalonia, an area called Catalonia, not far from Barcelona, close to southern France, Provence. Okay, so this is a very fascinating area. When the Christians start to take back Spain from the Muslims, they take the north first. So this is in the time of the Ramban. Christian Spain, very close to Provence and the teachers and the Torah of Provence. And it's a very interesting place because it's kind of in between the story of the Maimonidean controversy and how they feel about philosophy. That's a whole other story. It is very much an important Jewish center, especially for Kabbalah. Okay, we know the Ramban, who is great at everything, right? The Ramban is just a Renaissance man in many ways. He's also a great Kabbalist. One of his important teachers is Rabbeinu Yonah Girondi. Okay, Ramban actually is the Rav of community in Barcelona, but it's very, very close by. The picture here is the old Jewish quarter of Girona, so it's definitely an important place. And just like the Rambam, right, earlier signs his name, Moshe ben Maimon Hasfaradi, right? He leaves Sfarad. The Ramban leaves Sfarad as well, but this is his identity. He's from Girona. This is important to him. Okay, this is a seal. What is a seal, right? Why do you use a seal? So a seal is used since ancient times to identify yourself, to sign your letters, to identify your products, as we're going to see in a minute. Okay. Usually, it's something that you can stamp into something wet and pliable. In ancient times, it's clay. Later on, it's wax. Okay. Often, it's worn as a ring or as a necklace. These are what are called boule, seal impressions, right? This is after you stamp your thing into the clay. This is what's left. And by their nature, we find many more seal impressions than seals. These are some very important ones from by Rishon from Tanakh times. This is a seal impression that says Chizkiyahu Melech Yehuda. That's a pretty wild one. This is another one that says Gedaliah ben Pashhur, much less important guy, but somebody who appears in Sefer Yirmiyahu. So a seal can be used for identity, can also be used to show that a product is connected to you and has not been tampered with. Just like today, right? We have tamper-proof seals, but here in ancient times and medieval times, the seal is not just to show that it hasn't been tampered with, but to show whose it is. So you could have your name on it. We have something called cylinder seals that you could really use to seal across an entire barrel. You could have seals, and here we have a few interesting examples. Okay, this is a seal that was discovered at the foot of Harabayit, and it says Dicha Liya. And one suggestion, there's other suggestions, but for our purposes today, we'll go with this suggestion. One suggestion is it means pure for Hashem. Dicha, Aramaic for pure, Liya for Hashem. And this was something that was put on a bottle of oil, a jar of wine, right? Because you only needed things, you could only use things in the Beit HaMikdash that are pure, okay, that have purity. Later examples, right, two Byzantine period examples. This one, which is a great one, you can see it's a stamp that has a menorah. Okay, this is a stamp that was found also not far from Akko, okay, like our seal, and it has a name of somebody on it, Lontius, on the handle. What is this? This is a bread stamp. Okay, think about it for a second. Most people don't have ovens that they can bake their bread in. So you take your bread to the local baker, okay? And in order to make sure you get your bread back, your kosher bread, you stamp it. Now, the fact that you have the menorah and then you have a separate name on the handle tells you that some potter was making a bunch of these with menorahs because there was a Jewish market, right? And then you could come in and you could personalize it. This is Lontius's bread, not anybody else's bread, right? So it's great bread stamps. We have them, not only Jews use them, right? Christians use them for holy bread, but to have a Jewish example is very nice. And this one is very intriguing. This was discovered in Castra, which is the ancient site by Haifa, okay? And it says on it, in two columns, but it says on it Shvi'it, okay? Shvi'it as in Shemitah, right? This is from wheat made from Shemitah wheat. Why would you want to buy that? That's another interesting question. I don't know if researchers have looked into it, but it's another kind of a stamp that you definitely put on food. Gemara and Avodah Zarah talks about this. One who sends a barrel of wine in the hands of a Samaritan, or a barrel of fish brine or fish stew in the hands of a Gentile. If he recognizes his seal and his manner of closing the barrel, it is permitted. If he doesn't, it is prohibited, meaning we're worried that the non-Jew or the Shomrani is going to open it up, is going to tamper with it, right? Both for safety concerns, for Avodah Zarah concerns. So you have to be able to have a tamper-proof seal. Now, interesting, we have a seal that is in the Torah, right? The Ramban himself writes about Yehuda's seal. Remember what happens? Yehuda goes to Tamar, who he doesn't know it's Tamar. He doesn't have any money. She asks for some kind of credit, and she says, "Give me chotamcha tilcha," right? Umatcha, right? Is that what I'm saying? Chotamcha tilcha. What's the third one? It's mateh. Am I saying that right? Okay. In any case, the Ramban explains what did Yehuda have? What is a chotam? And he says, "V'yitachen od ki haya Yehuda chotam kisurat aryeh," right? Yehuda aryeh. O tzura acheret yidua kamoshlim, as rulers do, right? The Ramban is familiar with this concept. Now we have Jewish seals from the Middle Ages that have images. Okay, this is one of them. There's a guy named Todros Halevi Bar Shmuel Halevi, okay, Ben Halevi, okay, Noach Ben Halevi, and it has a nice little castle around inside the words. We have seals that have animals on them. Okay, sometimes they connect with the name, like we saw, like the Ramban says, a lion for Yehuda, a bull for Yosef, right? We have my favorite one that I read about, Shabtai Tzvi, the false Messiah. He has a seal that has a snake. Why? Because Nachash is the same gematria as Mashiach. Okay, very nice. But the Ramban, interestingly, does not put an image on his seal. Okay, does he think it's maybe Avodah Zarah? Does he think it's not necessary? He's a modest guy. We don't know. He's definitely aware of this concept, but he himself does not do it. Okay, so just very briefly, we won't spend too much time on this, but the Ramban, right, the Ramban, a man who needs no introduction, but of course, the Ramban is brilliant, brilliant Renaissance man. He, of course, writes his Perush al Torah, which is such a powerful and important Perush. He's a Talmudist. He's a Kabbalist. He is a doctor. I always wonder when these guys have time to do all these things. He's a doctor. He knows about medicine, and he's also the leader of his community. Right? And in his works, he is very much what we would call a proto-Zionist, meaning he believes very deeply in the importance of settling in Eretz Israel, right? And one of the really rather shocking things that he says, and you can read through it yourself. I won't go through the whole thing here, but in his commentary to Vayikra, basically he says that when Hashem sends us into exile, he says, Hatzivi lach siyunim, pasuk from Yirmiyahu, set up signposts when you do the mitzvot in Chutz La'aretz, it's so that you don't forget about them. But the main fulfillment of the commandments is when you are dwelling in the land of God, which is a wild thing to say, right? To say, he doesn't go so far as to say doing mitzvot in Chutz La'aretz doesn't count, but he almost says that, okay? And then he also writes on the Rambam's Sefer HaMitzvot and his listing of the Rambam, Sefer HaMitzvot, and he writes mitzvot sheshachach Rambam. Right? It's a very nice way of saying it. Not the mitzvot that I disagree, but the mitzvot that the Rambam forgot to put in. And I'm gonna help out the Rambam a little bit, and I'm gonna put it in for him. Right? Shenitztavenu la reshet haaretz. Rambam doesn't say you have to live in Eretz Yisrael. Nitztavenu la reshet haaretz ha'el yitalel avotenu Avraham Yitzchak Yaakov v'lo na'azva biyad zulatenu min ha'umot o lishmama, right? And you have to come. V'amru yeshivat Eretz Yisrael shkula keneged kol mitzvot. So the Ramban very much wants to settle in Eretz Yisrael. However, he has a very, very busy and full life in Spain. But then what happens? Hey, he is essentially forced into a debate with the local Christian friar, Pablo Cristiani, who is actually a Jew who converts to Christianity. Why do they do this? The church forces the leadership to do this because the hope is, oh, well, our guy, he's going to convince you of the truth of Christianity, and then you're going to convert, and everybody else is going to convert too. Of course, the Ramban, nobody can beat the Ramban in a debate. Come on, this Pablo Cristiani, it's a nobody. He can't do it. And the Ramban, of course, runs circles around him. And you can read through one of the things he says, right? This is, I think, probably my favorite thing here, right? Friar Paul said, do you believe that the Messiah has already come? Why do I keep doing this? And he says, no, I believe and know rather that he has not come. This is the Ramban. It is impossible for me to accept that he is the Messiah, for the prophet has said he will have dominion for sea to sea, and the Nazarene had no dominion. Fine, Jesus had no power. He was persecuted, but even better, the prophet states that in the time of the Messiah, they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. From the days of the Nazarene until now, the entire world has been full of violence and robbery. Indeed, the Christians spill more blood than the rest of the nations. How difficult it would be for you, my Lord King, right? He's saying this in front of Jaime the First of Aragon. How difficult it would be for you and your knights if they would neither lead war no more. So the Ramban says, Messiah has come. Come on. Look around, see the world. All right, the Messiah has not come. Now, the Ramban handily wins the debate, and he would have been okay, except he makes the fatal mistake of writing a book. Right? He writes a book called Sefer HaVikuach. This is how we know what he says. He writes in Hebrew. It's translated into Latin. Not good, and he has to be kicked out. He's banished. Where does he go? He could go to Portugal. He could go to Italy. He doesn't. He goes to Eretz Yisrael. Comes to Eretz Yisrael. He writes a very famous letter home to his son about Yerushalayim and what does he do and where does he go? And he goes to Hebron, to Kever Avot, right? But also famously, and there's a book written by Rav Yonatan Yaakov's about how the Ramban changes his Perush after he comes to Eretz Yisrael. And the famous thing that he writes, the most famous, is about Kerachel, which is in the picture here, right? Ze katavti tchila. I wrote at first that the Kever Rachel is very far from Beit Lechem. ועכשיו שזכיתי ובאתי אני לירושלים, שבח לאל הטוב והמיטיב, ראיתי בעיניי שאין מן קבורת רחל לבית לחם אפילו מיל, right? I saw with my own eyes because Hashem allowed me to come here to Eretz Israel, and now I have to change my opinion. We won't go into Kever Rachel. He comes to Yerushalayim. He rehabilitates the community in Yerushalayim. He takes an abandoned building. They bring a Torah. Is this the Ramban Shul of today, or is that slightly later? We won't go into that debate, but he definitely rehabilitates the Jewish community of Jerusalem, right? Because he says the Jerusalem is more desolate than the rest of the land. There are no Israelites among the 2,000 inhabitants. Right? He comes. There's the Mamluks are taking it back from the Crusaders. There's been a Mongol invasion. There's a lot going on. But there are two dyers who purchase dye from the government, and a minyan gathers for prayers in their house. I encourage them. We have found an abandoned building, which we converted into a synagogue. They brought the Torah scrolls that had been sent to Shechem for safekeeping, right? And he rehabilitates the community in Jerusalem. Sadly, I am not going to read Igeret HaRamban, which is a beautiful, beautiful ethical will. Please look in the sources and read it yourself. But importantly, we need to get to Akko. Okay? The Ramban is not satisfied with rehabilitating the Jewish community in Jerusalem, and he continues on to Akko. Akko is a very important, interesting place. On the one hand, it's a Crusader city. Crusaders and Jews, not good, right? Crusaders massacre many Jews. However, paradoxically, they come to Akko, and it becomes a port that is much easier to come to. And so Jews who are coming to Eretz Israel, it's actually easier to come once the Crusaders take over Akko. We have Rambam who comes, right, when his one trip to Eretz Israel. I came to Akko after he flees, right? He flees from the Muslims who try to convert everybody. I was saved from apostasy. I vowed this day would be one of happiness and joy. On the third day of the week, on the 4th of Mar Cheshvan, we left Akko to go to Jerusalem. He says he goes into Har Bayit, which is fascinating, right? And then he goes to Hebron, to Marat HaMachpelah, and he celebrates these days. They are holidays for him, right? Not only the Rambam, there's a whole movement of the Baalei Tosfot who come in the early part of the 13th century to Akko. There's a yeshiva in Akko, maybe run by Rabbi Yechiel of Paris, maybe not so clear, okay? But what this tells us is that Jews are in medieval Eretz Israel. We always talk about the four holy cities, right? Tzfat, Tveria, Yerushalayim, and Hebron, but not only, right? Those are places where you have Jewish communities in Middle Ages, but you also have a community in Akko. You also have a community in Haifa. You have other places, smaller places where Jews are living. And really kind of what I wanted to bring out from these two objects is this idea that, yes, the non-Jews are fighting over Eretz Israel, right? First Rashi in the Torah, that Koch Masav Higid La'amo Latet Lahem Nachlat Goyim. Rashi sees the Crusaders, the Muslims, these huge empires are fighting over Eretz Israel, but really, Eretz Israel is the Nachala of Hashem, and Hashem gives it to us. And despite all the things that are going on around them, intellectually, spiritually, the Jews are able to create a world for themselves and to love Eretz Israel. And I really wanted to finish with the Ramban. The Ramban famously gives a drasha for Rosh Hashanah in Akko. This is towards the end of his life, right? He's going to die in Akko, be buried nearby. And at the end of this drasha, he writes about the importance of living in Eretz Israel, and he says, this consideration of the importance of dwelling in Eretz Israel has taken me out of my native land and has moved me from my place, right? Think about it. The Ramban's not a young man when he leaves Spain. And he comes to Eretz Israel. He leaves behind his family. I have forsaken my house. I have cast off my heritage. I have become like the raven to my children, cruel to my daughters, right? Raven who abandons his children. Because of my desire to be moved, I have placed myself into the lap of my mother. Okay. And Rav Shavel, in explaining what he means here, what is the lap of his mother, he brings the Yerushalmi, talking about someone way before the Ramban, and that's Ula, right? Ula would travel back and forth from Eretz Israel to Bavel. He was a nechute, an immigrant. And when he was dying, he was in Bavel. And he started to cry. And they said to him, why are you crying? We shall bring you to the land of Israel, right? We'll bury you in the land of Israel. Don't worry, Ulad. He said to them, how does this help me? I am losing my pearl in an impure land, meaning I'm going to die in Babel. One cannot compare one who expires in the bosom of his mother to one who expires in the bosom of a strange woman. And that seems to be what the Ramban is referencing, and this deep, deep love for Eretz Yisrael. And he leaves behind a part of himself that we found um, literally 700 years after the Ramban dies. So really a very nice ending that we have from the Ramban. Let's take a look at notes that people have. Aleppo Codex was on display in Heichal Sefer. I think it still is, by the way. The end of the pasuk is not the same. The spelling of the yeah, not everything is the same in the Dead Sea Scrolls as in the text, and that's one of the importances of the Keter. Okay, right. There was a Karaite community in Lithuania, very very interesting. Saved from the Nazis, by the way, because Jews told the Nazis that they're not really Jews, meaning in order to save them. Yeah, 3D visual tour. Thank you. It wasn't a documentary. That's a much better description. The Sasson Codex, yes, was just recently purchased by Anu. I don't remember the dating. I don't know, Susanna, if you remember the dating. It's younger. I don't think it's much younger, but it is very important. Tanakh based on Kasuto to the 6th year of the modern state of Israel. Nice. Okay. Went to Israel on October 23rd, and it was on the plane. What, the Sasson Codex was on the
Yeah,
plane?
yes, the Sasson Codex. Yeah, yeah.
Oh, that's very cool. Did
We
it have its own
landed we
seat?
landed on October 5th in 23. I
Very
was
cool.
for a wedding that was supposed to take place on October 10th, which of course did not
Oh
take
my
place.
gosh. Wow. Wow. So it got here. Nuch Nafshe is akin to rest in peace. Yeah, it's like we would say, Alav Shalom, Zichrono Livracha, right? I don't think it's something that people use anymore. Maybe they do on graves and things like that. Where was the Ramban buried? Yes, we have a few places. You would think the Ramban would be so important that we would know where he's buried. We have a tradition that he is buried in Haifa. We have another tradition, I believe, that he's buried near Akko. And we have a tradition that he's buried by Hebron. We don't really have a grave. It's not like the Rambam that we really know where the Rambam is buried. We have his grave. It's not so clear. Most of the
Can I
codices in
say
the National
something?
Library are from Syria. Yes.
I want to say something about the first picture that you put.
Yeah.
That Jerusalem is the center of the world.
Nachon, the map.
Yes, that it's not just the center of Israel, but it's the center of the world. You showed this picture, and we see Asia, Africa, Europa, and in the center, not Israel, but
But
Jerusalem.
Yerushalayim. Nachon, Yerushalayim. You are correct.
ירושלים בסנטר, מרכז העולם.
Nachon, you are right. And by the way, the city of Jerusalem loves this map. There's a big copy of it by City Hall, right? So that's very nice. Thank you, Ruchama. Very nice. Okay, last comment. Lithuania census from the 19th century. Jews were
Yes,
counted in the same ledger as the Karaites.
I just wanted to say that it was done not by a Jew, but by a pastor,
No,
by a
no, not
Christian.
by a Jew, but the non-Jews also saw Yerushalayim as the center of the world. Exactly. Okay, the Jews are counted like the Karaites, but very, very significantly, when the Nazis come to Lithuania, to Troika, Lithuania, they go to the Jews and they say, "Who are these guys? These Karaites? Are they part of you?" And the rabbi understands that by saying that they are not Jewish, he will save their lives.
Yeah,
And that's very important, and that's what he does.
yeah.
Sasson Codex, the year
And
1000. Okay, so similar to Leningrad.
okay, Shulie, as a footnote to the Karaite story, then the Jews went to the Karaim and said, "Will you take some Jews and say they're Karaites?" And they said no. So
Really,
yeah,
that's a very sad footnote. I did not know that.
yes, I was
I am
just there,
sorry to hear that.
and yes, that was the returning the favor.
All right, my friends.
Okay, thank
Shabbat
you.
Shalom. Next week we are having our last class. Um, and I'm going to do some modern stuff. I actually haven't decided what I'm doing. If anyone has any interesting suggestions, send them in. I might ignore them, but send them in anyway. Okay.
Thank-
Shabbat shalom, everyone.
Shabbat
Thank you. This
shalom.
was
Shabbat
great.
shalom.
Shabbat
Wish
Thank
you
shalom.
you.
all
Thank you, Shulie.
Shulie, if you're still there, I bought
I'm
this
here.
hummus. I bought this hummus like at a junk kind of antique store. And then
Yeah.
I had it rebound by
Okay.
this old guy on Rehov Berlin. And he was related to that Rabbi Casuto. And he showed me how on the front page it says it's his version of the Chumash.
Aye,
And at the
beautiful.
bottom it says the 6th year of the state of Israel.
Yeah, they used to write that. I love it. Who's the publisher? Does it say?
Ah, I don't know.
Because it's not yet. I don't think it's Rav Breuer yet. Because his Tanakh, I don't think is that early.
Magnus Press, Hebrew University.
Nice. Oh, so maybe it is Rav Breuer. I don't know. That's a very cool thing to have. Beautiful. Very
It's
nice.
lovely to use it a few times. Thank you.
Okay. Excellent. Okay. Shabbat shalom, everyone.
Bye,